All right, it appears just about everyone who registered is already here. So if there are some stragglers, that's fine. I'll go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to the first SABR Oklahoma chapter meeting of 2022. Um, Initially, like in the planning stages, was going to be an in-person meeting, but the last couple of months have made that slightly more difficult. So we pivoted to virtual for this one. Hopefully, by the time we get our next meeting planned out, we can actually do something in person. I wanted to start by just going over like the current events, relatively speaking, of what happened in baseball. The Hall of Fame announcement came out. The Veterans Committee met and inducted their six players: Bud Fowler, Buck O'Neill, Manny Minoso, Jim Cott, Gil Hodges, and Tony Oliva. And then the writers, despite their best efforts, actually did vote someone in this year. David Ortiz squeaked in just above the 75% threshold. And Barry Bonds, Roger Clemens, Sammy Sosa, and Curt Schilling, in accordance with his wishes, have fallen off the ballot. So obviously, like I said, when everyone was filing in, I'm very excited to see David Ortiz get in. I was tracking the vote, and it seemed like it was going to be close, kind of like when Larry Walker got in. But it would have been hard to keep Ortiz out long term. But I was pleasantly surprised to see him in first ballot. I wanted to open it up to y'all and see if you had any input on who got in, or perhaps more interestingly, who didn't.
The question I had, I guess I don't follow the Hall of Fame that closely. I didn't know there was this 1950 to 1969 special committee. What's the motivate? What's the reason for that? Is it just a bunch of baby boomers that are grumpy that their heroes didn't get in or something? Or
I think that they've broken it up into year blocks so that they don't have to evaluate everyone in the history of baseball all at once, by breaking up into eras that meet every third year or every fourth year. I think that their goal is to try to get more people in. I assume that's why they did it.
Yeah. Not getting anybody in is kind of bad for business for the Hall of Fame. They need inductees every year, right? And
live inductees.
And they'd prefer have live inductees, right? So one committee meets every 10 years, which happens to be the one that also includes the Negro League players. So they only get to be evaluated every 10 years. And then there's the players who played in more recent eras get more frequent committees that meet. But the baseball writers are kind of getting stingier and stingier about voting people in. And again, that's not, the Hall of Fame makes their money on Hall of Fame weekend, right? When somebody's inducted and a bunch of fans come and all that. So it's bad for business not to have inductees. So they're trying to set things up so that they at least get somebody inducted every year.
That's Frankie Frisch can't be on all committees, right?
Right.
Yeah, then we'd start getting, if you have like, I guess the generational equivalent, be like if there's a Derek Jeter committee or something, then we'd have all the 96 Yankees in the Hall of Fame, and nobody wants that.
Yeah. Well, some people do, but people in New York City, but It reminds me a little bit of the Medal of Honor. In the 19th century, they passed out medals of honor out like Purple Hearts, basically. And then now you almost have to like kill thousands of the enemy and rescue 500 people under fire and be blown into little bits in order to get a Medal of Honor. But in the 19th century, they were just here, have one.
Well, I wonder about Ortiz being in. His suspicion of PED. does this open the door for Bonds, Clemens, Palmero even, et cetera? That's the question I have right now.
Well, and I think that's interesting because I think the next committee that's supposed to meet next year is addressing, I think they call it the modern era. So you're going to see Bonds, Sosa, Clemens, Palmero, and then less controversially, people like Schilling who didn't get in. And so that's going to be interesting when you reduce the sample size from hundreds of riders to just 12 people in a room. What that entails. I don't know, but like you said about Kevin said earlier about not inducting people is bad for business. 2023 might be a boom for that if those committees meet and decide to let them in.
More to the point, Rodriguez.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was a totally different.
Well,
social
he's still
ballot.
got a few years to be on the regular ballot, though. A-Rod does.
Yeah, that's it. He's still on the ballot. It's more to the point than the committees.
Mhm.
He's waiting. And if anybody has Hall of Fame numbers, that's it.
Yeah, when you get a group of people in a room, one person with a strong personality and an agenda can kind of ram something through sometimes. Whereas when you're
Yeah.
voting anonymously at a distance,
Yeah, look at the Hall of Fame from the 1920s.
yeah.
They're all Frankie Frisch buddies.
Mhm.
No, it's true.
Yeah.
He ran that committee. And so you have players who really, fame was not exactly what they had,
Just about any New York Giant from that decade.
or St. Louis Cardinal.
Yep.
I mean, High Pockets Kelly, come on.
Well, I think that was some of the scuttlebutt about when Harold Baines got in is it seemed to be, oh, Tony La Russa was on the committee and La Russa was his former manager, big fan of Baines, and that he kind of willed Baines into the Hall of Fame. I don't know if I necessarily buy it, but I could totally see La Russa definitely stumping for him. And yeah, if you have one strong-willed guy, if you have, a Dusty Baker, for example, a guy Bonds managed, if you have someone like that on the committee, that might be enough. Yeah.
So who was on the committee this year that put these 6 in? Somebody have any names? Because I mean, you could make an argument. Tony Oliva, Harold Baines, pretty similar career numbers.
Well, Oliva is one of those cases, the short career
Mhm.
because of injuries.
Right.
Baines is just the opposite, long career, because he stayed healthy.
Yeah.
And played in a good era for what the type of hitter he was. Oliva, think about what he did in the mid 1960s.
He could flat out hit.
He could flat out hit.
Yeah. I'm thinking Tony Gwynn with power, with a little power.
And could play right field.
Mhm.
The one on the Veterans Committee list that I had issue with, and I'm trying to talk myself into it, is Gil Hodges. I think if you make a case, if you include his managerial stint with the Mets, I think maybe I can justify it, but I don't know if it was a merit based just on his playing career, or if that was another one of those things where he benefited from being on one of the most romanticized teams in baseball history, the Boys of Summer and all of that. I don't know. Again, I'm just going off of the statistics and what I've read. So
Yeah.
It says here that the committee is Burt Blyleven, Fergie Jenkins, John Sherholz, Ozzie Smith, Joe Torre, Bill DeWitt, Ken Kendrick, Tony Regans, Gary Ashwell, Adrian Burgos Jr., Leslie Heafy, Jim Henneman, Justice Hill, Steve Hurt, Rick Hummel, and John Thorne.
Okay.
Yep. And there were 2 committees. So there was, and some of those guys were on both committees. But yeah, that's the list, I think. And some are writers, some are former players, and some are historians. particularly the Negro League experts were historians, right?
That committee makeup is a huge deal. It's one of those who do you know? How are you networked? With Baines, it wasn't only LaRussa, Jerry Reinsdorf was on that same committee. So had his owner and his manager, and I imagine they weren't shy in that setting.
So,
I would say that absolutely benefited Baines. I didn't know about Reinsdorf at all. So yeah.
so this is Barry Bonds last year on the ballot,
Yeah,
but he can be put in later by a committee.
Yep.
Is that
Probably
also true for
posthumously.
Roger Clemens and Kurt Schilling and
And how often does that committee meet? The successor group, the modern era, whatever you call it.
They're meeting next year. I don't know how often, but I did hear that they are meeting next year, which should be interesting. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me at all between guys falling off the ballot and all these guys in the modern era. You get a half dozen people inducted next year or more.
be interesting to hear who's on that committee. You could have PED users on the committee.
I think it was interesting. I read something a couple of years ago, Sammy Sosa, where he was interviewed, and he said he put out an exact number. He said there are already 6, or I forget how many PED users already in the Hall of Fame. And then I started thinking about who he might be talking about. Like, at least he didn't go as far as Canseco and name names, but if Sosa's true, and that's a correct statement, then yeah, I think that changes everything. But as of right now, there's no hard and fast proof on anyone who's currently in, at least that I'm aware of. But it was certainly an interesting thought experiment once I read that.
Well, it's the same argument they use with Joe Jackson, Pete Rose in gambling. There are a lot of guys in the Hall of Fame who bet on baseball games, and an almost credible rumors about Tris Speaker and Ty Cobb breaking coordinating. I think it was Dutch Leonard was the one who made that claim, and they both denied it. Therefore, it didn't happen. That's the original Dutch Leonard, Hubert Leonard.
I wouldn't have wanted to say that to Ty Cobb's face.
Who would today?
I think it was John Thorne. I could be wrong. I think I think I was reading something by him one time, and he said that that back when there were no playoffs, there was just the World Series, that there were a lot of late season games that were completely meaningless. That a lot of historians have looked at some of these games and said that's extremely suspicious, but there's never going to be any proof. All the people are dead, but you just think, it's a hot August day, in St. Louis, you're 24 games out of the pennant race, some guy wants to buy you a case of beer if you strike out a couple of times, it's
Well, in those days, the race was for 4th place anyway, because that's where the World Series split, extended down through the top 4.
Yeah, first division.
Or the top half actually went to 10 teams. It's top half of the league. Of course, now regular season doesn't mean anything anymore. It's a popular feeling out there about Ortiz and PEDs. I mean, what is there? I don't follow it that closely. I mean, he was mentioned in that early first report as a probable user. Now, it never tested positive, as far as I know. And never came up anything further than that, but he was mentioned in that along with McGuire, Sosa, Canseco, of course, Palmero. We know he didn't do it because he said he did.
Oh, well, that's,
But Frank Thomas was suspected. A lot of these big, strong guys who came out in the 80s are suspected of that. Bagwell, Thomas. I've heard speculation about both of those. And then you have the ones that are pretty obvious. The little center fielder for the Orioles hit 50 home runs one year and never more than 13. The rest of his
Brady
career,
Anderson. Yeah.
Brady. Yeah.
There's something there.
Well,
I just-
if
I'm sorry. I just looked up, somebody had mentioned that these guys that fell off the ballot because of the PEDs and whatever, could be eligible next year with the committee, but they have to be 20 years non-active before they're eligible to be on that. So they've got good five more years at least on some of these guys. So you're not going to see bonds popping up next year.
that's okay with me. Do amphetamines fall in the same category as PEDs? Because I mean, amphetamine use was very widespread in America in the 50s and 60s.
Well, that's the counter argument you always make. That the greenie,
Mhm.
supposedly you can put it in the coffee, because caffeine didn't do enough.
Yeah. I
But
mean,
I think it's a different thing. Greenie, that gives you, like caffeine, temporary enhancement maybe, but the PED makes you grow bigger and stronger, and it has a lasting effect. It doesn't go away overnight. I'm not an expert on that by any means, but that's my understanding.
I was really asking if there's a rule about it or anything.
And you see some of these football players, professionals, 10 years after they retired from football, all of a sudden aren't big bulky guys anymore.
Has anybody seen pictures of Sammy Sosa lately? He's got the skin on his arms is just hanging off because there's no muscle under it anymore.
Yeah, it was Sports Illustrated had like a "Where Are They Now" issue with Sammy Sosa, and yeah, he's lost some weight. I'll leave it at that. Yeah.
There was a guy at the University of Tulsa when I was in law school there who weighed 310 pounds when he finished his senior year. He was an offensive lineman. And in 6 months, he lost 115 or 20 pounds or something. He didn't even look like the same person. In fact, his wife divorced him, said she had married a big, strong guy and she didn't want to be married to this skinny guy. I can't remember his name or anything about it. It was 30 years ago. But I don't know if he was on PEDs or anything, but or steroids or whatever. Are steroids and PEDs the same thing?
No, I think so, but I don't know.
I think steroid is a type of PED.
Okay.
Yeah, they're treated the same, but yeah, it's not the same.
Maybe PED is a big category and steroids are a
I think
subcategory.
so. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I understood.
Yeah, the human growth hormone is the other one that's, HGM, HGH. That's the one always was mentioned with Frank Thomas. And again, it was all speculative. He never tested positive for anything. He could hit.
Yeah, I think I would be stunned if Frank Thomas, if it ever came out. Like, this is a guy who played tight end at Auburn. He was always a big dude, and
Yeah, I know, but people said, rumor,
yeah,
charge, people that couldn't get him out.
yeah, because Thomas could hit for average. Like, the power was there, obviously, but I think he had 2 batting titles. Like, yeah, this is a guy who could hit for average. very well into his career, even when the power tailed off.
Well, he played for the White Sox, so I can assure you he's clean.
How long has he been retired now?
Thomas. I don't know. He's first ballot Hall of Famer. I know that.
I
About
think
10
06
years.
or 07 was his last year.
Okay.
What do you think of him as a broadcaster or panelist? I guess is kind of how they use him.
Even doing commercials.
Yeah, I thought the Fox coverage of the World Series was interesting. You had Frank Thomas, you had Ortiz, and you had A-Rod. And Frank Thomas basically having to be the straight man and all of that, but no, I mean, and now of course, like you talk about HGH, now he's doing all these ads. He's everywhere now with whatever GNC pill he's selling. So I find that kind of funny. It would be funnier if it was like Jose Canseco or something doing it, but I do see the humor in the situation.
Well, I didn't know anything about Bud Fowler. You know, I frankly, I admit I'd never even heard of him. So I did look him up a little bit, and I found a Cincinnati newspaper account of the game he played against the Reds. You know, his team, the Pacer Giants, played a couple of games against the Reds in 1895. I guess at that time he was like 47 years old or something like that. And I have to confess, I would not be willing to read this entire article out over the internet for fear of being censored, because there's definitely some old-fashioned stereotypical writing in here. But there are some interesting comments. It says he's been playing baseball for the past 26 years, but he is as spry and as fast in his actions as any man on the team. He has no Charlie horses or stiff joints, but can bend over and get up a grounder like a young blood. Bear in mind, this is a guy that played catcher some too, you know, without a glove. So he said he has played match games for Trappers Furs. He has played for the championship of a mining camp for bags of gold dust and played with cowboys and Indians. Let's see. So that means he was born when about the Civil War or something, or a little bit before. Says he is. Says he's cross-roaded it from one town to another all over the far west, playing for what he could get and taking a hand to bring out a team. When the baseball business was dull, he would get out and turn a trick as a sprinter. He can do 100 yards in close to even time. And there's some expressions there I'm not willing to read out loud. But apparently he played a huge number of games. Also, apparently was the manager of this team, the Pace Giants. And unfortunately, he was 0 for 8 in the 2 games they played against the Reds. So, but it was, I did look at the box score. He was batting second. I guess he was the manager of the team as well. One comment that they made in here was that they said that his team would not be bothered by the big glove rule. And in 1895 was when the National League put the rule in that gloves could only be, I think I wrote it down here. I knew there was such a rule, but I didn't know I'd forgotten what year it came into effect. But they said on his team, the Pace Giants, that only the first baseman, the catcher, and only the first baseman and the catcher wore gloves. Okay, the glove could only weigh 10 ounces and be 14 inches in circumference around the palm. Well, this is the only glove I have left. I didn't weigh it, but it is 20 inches around the palm and is 14 inches long. So, he never played with a glove, apparently. Bud Fowler did. He always played barehanded. He said it hurt early in the season and then you got used to it. But I thought that was interesting. Like I said, I'd never heard it. Apparently he got fired. Well, a lot of teams would send him a contract not knowing he was black. And then he would show up and they would tear up the contract and say, nope, nope, go away.
Yeah, it was the first time I'd heard about Bud Fowler. I was reading Only the Ball Was White, which is a great book. They talk about the early before the established Negro leagues. That's what they talked about him, and he was kind of a one-man band. Yeah, coach, manager, planning everything. Yeah, and was really sort of the first black baseball superstar before the more organized Negro leagues came about. Yeah.
Yeah, he's really the first guy to be elected for his minor league record. Of course, he wasn't allowed to play in the major leagues, but he's primarily elected because he had such a good minor league record, right, in professional baseball. Plus all the semi-pro stuff he did. Plus he was an organizer, team owner, manager. He kept creating teams that would travel the country because, again, teams wouldn't employ him as a player, so he made his own team. And
There are a
made
lot
money.
of the old guys on the white side, the organized ball side, are in because of contributions. They played. Al Spalding's career was rather short, for example, although he dominated baseball for a number of years. And that would justify him and the other pioneers in black baseball, I think, would be justified in putting them in the Hall of Fame. Although it's getting so big now, I don't know who's in it anymore.
I think the committee that put him in is called the Executive and Pioneer Committee or something like that.
That would be there rather than the minor league record would be the justification I would use.
Yeah, I think that's what partly why he's in, right, as an organizer and such. But he is, he also did have a playing career, and he did fairly well. Yeah, but but Ricky, that's not quite the same, but yeah.
Right.
I played in 8th grade.
Well, and the contributor thing is interesting because, and Kevin might be the person to ask for this. When you're talking about contributors, especially in the Negro Leagues, what about any traction for, was it A.G. Wilkinson? I don't know if he's already in, but would he be someone worth considering? I would assume so.
J.L. Wilkinson, I guess. Yeah, the Monarchs. Yeah.
Oh, yes, that's that. Yeah. Wilkinson was, I knew I was
Yeah,
confident on that. Yeah.
Yeah. I can't even remember if he's in now or not. I'm getting like Howard, just like, okay, who's in, who isn't in. But yeah, he would be an owner. And of course, owners get in. Some of the owners have been in for sure. But I actually thought Wilkinson was in already. That maybe he didn't get in. In
And he may
2006.
be, because I think of Cumberland Posey's in, and now people like Buck O'Neill's in and Bud Fowler's in. So in terms, I'm just trying to spitball on the sort of contributors thing. I think Rube Foster's already in.
Yes.
So yeah, so I think Wilkinson might be about the only one that I can think of off the top of my head that, if he's not already, you could have to make a good case for.
Yeah, Gus Greenlee's not in, and I know he's one that people advocate for.
Wilkinson is in.
Okay, thanks, Ted. I thought so, but Greenlee's not. I know, and so he's one, I think, of the owners that's still kind of out there that may deserve to get in, right? But of course, he was also a numbers guy, which somewhat may link him to organized crime, et cetera, and that may be why people are hesitant to put him in.
He's certainly, like, despite the obvious impact, there were some unsavory elements to his side gig, I guess. But another one that I thought of while he was confirming Wilkinson was in, it was Effa Manley was another one who got in fairly recently. Only female thus far to get in. So that would be another one that as a contributor that is well deserved.
The SABR biography of Bud Fowler says that it wasn't his real name, that he was playing under an assumed name. And they said they don't really know why, unless they thought his parents were ashamed of him for playing baseball, which I guess is possible. But, does anyone know of, is there any update on that? Or does anyone know any reason why he would have done such a thing?
Yeah, back in the 1800s, baseball was considered unsavory profession, right? At some point. So yeah, it's definitely possible. Yeah, his name wasn't William White was the real name. I can't even remember now.
I can't remember now, James or something.
Yeah.
Maybe James. He was actually a junior, I remember. I don't remember his real last name. I'll look it up.
You know,
His dad was a barber.
Minoso wasn't executive or owner or anything, but you think part of his selection is contributions to the game, the whole culture thing, first Black Cuban, and is he the first Cuban period? The articles talked about him being
No.
They talked about him being the first Black Cuban. Is that right? I think that's correct. But anyway, he was kind of the anti Kurt Schilling, I guess, as far as being beloved and, you know, crossed all those decades. And he was kind of part of baseball lore, I guess you could say. Although his playing career was, you know, it was pretty solid too.
Again, it was short,
Yeah.
which cut him short of the benchmarks, 2,000 hits. He didn't hit a home run. Of course,
He got to 2,000 with the Negro League. He got to 2,000.
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
in organized ball.
Right.
No, but I think Dolph Luque probably was the first Cuban player. And
He wasn't a Black Cuban though.
he
Luque
well,
wasn't.
no, he was accepted.
Yeah,
there was
but
debate.
there were a lot of Cubans, but there weren't too many Afro Cubans.
Yeah,
Right.
there was debate as to where he stood on that spectrum, but he did play and was a significant pitcher for several years, although well short of Hall of Fame standards.
Fowler's real name was John W. Jackson Jr. So his father was a barber, which I guess was considered middle class for Black people. So maybe his dad was a little embarrassed by his son playing baseball.
Yeah.
And I wanted to make one more point before I make sure I get it in. The Buck O'Neill induction got me thinking. Like, here's a guy just on his playing career alone wouldn't have gotten in. On managerial career, coaching career alone wouldn't have gotten in. But because of all that, because of decades involved in the game, and I think honestly his sort of starring role in the Ken Burns documentary didn't hurt things. People sort of fell in love with him during that time. But when we get to the period where certain managers start retiring, the two I thought of were Dusty Baker and Lou Piniella. Like, if you evaluate their careers as manager separate and as player separate, they probably wouldn't get in. But I think you can make a legitimate case that both of them should be in, honestly, as you combine their life's works in baseball.
Yeah, I mean, obviously Baker was a good player. I mean, he was an all-star and had a pretty good playing career, and then he's had a long managerial career. So, you know, he definitely clears like the Red Shane-Dienst bar, I guess. So,
Nello would have to go in as a manager.
Yeah. Pinella's career wasn't quite
I
as,
saw, he
good
was,
as Baker's, his playing career. So, or his managerial career probably either, really. So Baker should get in without any problem, I would think.
Yeah, I think Lou Pinella's playing career was all right, but I think he benefited a lot from being on the Yankees, like a lot of people have. And yeah, his outside of what was he was the coach for the '90 Reds, so he's got a title. But yeah, definitely you can look at those Mariners teams as sort of disappointing that they didn't get a little farther considering the talent they had. But yeah, I tend to agree with you that Dusty Baker should get in somehow. Pinella will be an interesting one to see. I think it's going to be left up to one of those committees, I'm sure.
I'm a Royals fan and I put thumbs down on Pinella. He started strong and then became a cipher by the time the Royals traded the Yankees. He was far overshadowed by Minnesota's, for instance, and the soon to be a rival of George Brett, John Mayberry. They weren't there yet. Yeah, about the time they got there was when they traded me. I can't remember what they got for him, but even us Royal fans have memories.
Yeah.
That's all we have, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, he's not going to get in for his playing career. It would be his managerial career, I think.
Yeah. I used to have a Mo Drabowski jersey. Drabowski was the first win for the Royals. He was actually born in Poland, but yeah, I mean, I had a custom jersey made that had his name on it, just as a conversation starter when I went to Royals games. So people would say, "Who's that?" I'd say, "Well." Yeah.
Did Pinella have a lot of injury problems? I was pulling up his stats, and from like 75 to 83, he had a bunch of seasons where he played in less than 100 games.
I think he's a platoon.
Yeah, he was a platooner as a right-hander batter. So
Yeah.
and he wasn't a great fielder, right? So he didn't.
That's an understatement.
Yeah. So Billy Martin platooned him a lot.
His last 10 years, he had 2 seasons where he appeared in 130 games, and then it dropped to 116, 103, and so on down. So he was not an everyday player.
How many of you have been to the actual Hall of Fame? I have not been there.
I have a long time ago. I was a kid. I'd like to go back.
Yeah, I would too.
That was the feature of my Finish the 50 tour. Was when I got to New York and New England, and in fact into Canada. That was what, maybe 10 years ago. I know I haven't traveled since.
It's probably been 60 years for me since I've been there. I still remember though the awe of as a kid walking into the actual hall where the plaques are, dark and quiet. I thought it was heaven on earth or something there.
I was there on Super Bowl Sunday, 1987. And a friend and I showed up in the morning and we had the place to ourselves for a couple of hours almost. But like you said, Ron, we were in awe, but we could take our time and no crowds. I'd like to go back though.
You guys that have been there more recently, if let's say you're by yourself and you didn't have a spouse or friend that wasn't going to be whining, if you how long, if you really wanted to dive into that place, how long should you allow?
Well, in your case, in my case, there's a lot more to see than when we were there that long ago. So I don't know.
I could do without the Rizzuto Holy Cow though.
I kind of had the opposite of you. This is Mark. Sorry, I'm late. I was in a different meeting, but I was there in '07 when Ripken and Tony Gwynn went in along with Denny Matthews from the Royals, and that was the largest crowd ever at that time. So we didn't quite have it to ourselves when we snuck through the hall. It was very crowded.
Yeah, I'd say 4 hours would be fair to do it justice, but you could do 8 or 10 hours without a problem.
I could. Yeah.
Do you need a plan? Is there, you need to like say, I want to go see the plaque for this player, or is it organized by team or decade or?
No. It's organized by exhibits, but I think a plan would be a good idea. There's 3 or 4 floors, and I'd plan.
Cooperstown kind of caters to the tourists too, right? I mean, there's some things going around in that town outside of the hall itself.
Go before school's out in summer.
Hmm.
We were up there.
There's several museums,
May.
and it's not far from the Boxing Hall of Fame and even the Women's Hall of Fame, if you do have a wife that's got a history interest.
And there's James Fenimore Cooper stuff around there too.
I think there's an excellent craft brewery in Cooperstown. I don't know how do you say that? Omegong or I don't know the pronunciation, but they make good beer.
There you go.
That reminds me of the BMW Museum in Munich. Is a fantastic museum. It's one of the best museums I've ever been to. If you like cars and motorcycles, and when you're there, there's all these men standing around these exhibits going, and this one, this one was turbo,
Yeah.
and over to the side, look, there's always this little group of women sitting in the chairs over by the window, staring at their phones, going, "Oh God, how long is this going on?" It's so funny to watch. It's a great museum, though. I highly recommend it if you're there.
All right, I know like time-wise, we might be up against it, so I wanted to get to Kevin. Kevin Johnson has a presentation that he wanted to do, and given our discussion on the Negro Leagues and the Hall of Fame, and it being Black History Month, I thought it would be a perfect one. So Kevin, I'll let you have at it.
Okay, and before I start, since this is our Oklahoma meeting, and I know some of you guys are big college baseball fans, Roy Peterson passed away this week, and he was the captain of the 1959 Oklahoma State National Championship team. Pitched a 4-hitter, I think, to get them into the finals. So I don't know. I don't know anything about him other than that, but I know some of you guys are really into the history of college baseball here in Oklahoma. So I don't know. Howard, did you know anything about that? Or
I just knew who he was, and for that team, and Ron and I were there at a ball game. They had a reunion of that team a few years ago, and Ron got all excited because he got to shake hands with Joe Horland. But that's a pretty good ball club, and they just won a championship despite the fact that their best player from the previous year, Jerry Adair, signed a contract just before school started in the fall and wasn't available to them. And the guy who took his place playing shortstop wound up being a center fielder the next year when Don Wallace showed up. Wallace, of course, was just this year put in the LSU Baseball Hall of Fame, but he had a cup of coffee with the Angels.
Howard deserves some credit for Wallace getting into the hall at OSU. He pulled together some information and sent it to the powers that be. And I think the one nugget that he uncovered was Wallace is the only former Cowboy player to ever win a professional batting title.
He was
Still is or was?
Matt
Okay.
Haig won an international league title.
Okay, you're tracking it closely then. But anyway, Howie and I got to sit at the same table with Wallace coincidentally a few years ago at the banquet. A real interesting fella.
All right, so I guess we better get started here. So let me see if I can get this to go. And hopefully you can see it. All right, so what we're going to talk about today is the major league ballparks that are now recognized as in Oklahoma as major leagues, because as you know, the Major League Baseball has now recognized the Negro Leagues from 1920 through 1948, 7 leagues that participated during that time as major league. They have not followed up on exactly how that's going to be defined, but I think we can be fairly confident that about some parks in Oklahoma that will now be considered as having had major league games played in them. So real quickly, we're going to start with some audience participation. There is a chat feature if you can find it in Zoom. So we're going to ask you a question. Oklahoma had a major Negro League team, whether you knew that or not. What year did this team play? So if you want to go into the chat and type in A, B, C, or D, we'll kind of see how much you know already about this. A, 1910, B, 1923, C, 1929, or D, 1949. And yeah, don't be shy. Just take a guess if you don't know. We got a few guesses coming through.
And I'll excuse myself from guessing since Kevin sent this to me yesterday. So
Oh, that's right.
I'll-
You know the answer.
yeah, I'll be quiet.
And the answer is 1910. Oklahoma had a major league team in 1910, a major Negro League team. So the next question is, what was the name of the Oklahoma-based team? Was it A, Giants, B, Monarchs, C, Stars, or D, Clowns?
It's pretty easy to cheat because you've got the next slide shows up on mine.
Ah, is it showing the next
Oh,
slide?
yeah. Yeah, I see that.
It shouldn't be. Yeah, I
It's up there.
probably have a setting somewhere that will hide that. But
If you go into presentation mode, I think it only shows one.
Somehow
Well,
I
I-
still missed the answer to the first one though. So
I thought I was in presentation mode, but let me see here real quick. Come on. I'm in slideshow.
I should have shut up. We could just blow you away with our knowledge. But
Yeah, I don't know why that's doing that. Okay, well, we'll give the answer is B, Monarchs. And so the 1910 Oklahoma Monarchs played 11 games against national teams. So they went national. I know 11 games doesn't sound like a lot, but at the time, Negro League teams, the national ones, were kind of scattered around. Oklahoma Monarchs were 3-8, but that's a little misleading because they played a home and home series against the Leland Giants, the Chicago Leland Giants, which were in the 1910 Chicago Leland Giants were one of the greatest Negro League teams ever. Several Hall of Famers and near Hall of Famers on that team. So their schedule was a little bit skewed, but they did go national in 1910. They built their roster actually by raiding the 1909 San Antonio Black Broncos. So the Black Broncos had kind of gone national in 1909, but apparently didn't turn a profit. And the Oklahoma team is notable because it had Hall of Famer Louis Santop. He was very young at the time, a teenager, but he was on the team as a backup. He made the Hall of Fame as a catcher, but he was actually mostly an outfielder for Oklahoma. Bingo DeMoss had a long career, 20-year career in the Negro Leagues. Again, he was also just starting out, started with Oklahoma. And Sam Bennett is another guy who had a long 20-year career. So they also had third baseman Johnson Hill, who went on to a fairly decent career, and pitcher Arthur Gilliard. So even though they only won 3 games nationally, they were a pretty interesting team. So we had a major Negro League team. What was their home ballpark? And hopefully this one doesn't show up the answer. So we'll let you hit the chat and try to guess whether it was A, Western League or Liberty Ballpark, B, Holland Park, C, McNulty Park, or D, Concord, also known as Sportsman's Park. And the answer is actually Concord Park, also known as Sportsman's Park. And this is a little article that was in the Oklahoman in 1907, a few years before the Oklahoma Monarchs played. But it's kind of interesting. You see, they made improvements in 1907 for 800 additional seats. And they're going to do some grading, and they're going to remove the sand heap in left field. The left fielder's position is going to be improved because they're going to get rid of the sand heap that's out there. They're going to level the ground. So it must have been interesting before 1907 to play left field in Concord Park.
You know where it was?
Oh yeah, we're going to talk about that. So that's the next thing. So here is a Sanborn map. Somewhere I've got the year here in the 1900s. So you see it's south Western Avenue. You see, unfortunately, Noble Avenue and Chickasaw Avenue are apparently gone now. So that makes it a little bit harder to figure out. But you can see it says Delmar Garden. There's actually here, there's a trolley turnaround. You can see there's a trolley car barn or shed where they would work on trolley cars. And you can also see there's an auditorium, refreshments, pavilion, there's a pool, there's a racetrack. And if you look in the upper left-hand corner, it says baseball park. And you can see that there's you probably can't read it on here, but there's a ticket booth. And then to the far left of that, there's a grandstand. But unfortunately, where the park would be is kind of off to the left here, off the Sanborn map. So this kind of leaves a little bit of a mystery. But if we go to this 1906 map, a little bit different kind of map, you can see Reno Avenue up at the top. And the other street is Western Avenue that's going kind of 3/4 of the way toward the right. And you can see the racetrack there. And you can see a word, it says park site. It says Delmar Garden. So the park was somewhere obviously right here between Reno Avenue, Western Avenue, just north of the racetrack. It's 15th Street, I think, is the one down at the bottom, the very bottom. So this is kind of a large area here. So if we look at a modern day map, you can see Reno Avenue up there at the top. You can see Southwestern Avenue. You can see there's still Delmar Gardens there, an area called Delmar Gardens. So the park was up kind of in that upper corner. Today, Exchange Avenue kind of splits where the park would have been. And then the racetrack would have been there just north of what's Highway 40 today. So that's where the park was. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Oklahoma City and would know kind of where that's at.
Oh, yeah.
Oh yeah, okay. So here's the question: will I can't say it. Colcord Park now be considered a major league park? But unfortunately, the answer is no, because Major League Baseball is only recognizing the major Negro Leagues as being major leagues from 1920 through 1948. And the major team the Oklahoma had was in 1910. They really weren't in a league. It was more of an association of teams. They scheduled their own games against each other, et cetera. So Major League Baseball is not recognizing the Oklahoma Monarchs as one of the major league teams, which actually means Colcord Park will not be one of those parks. So let's get on to the ones that actually will be, though. So
Can I ask a question first?
sure.
Is this one of those parks that was sort of entertainment complex built at the end of the trolley line to promote the use of electricity?
I think that was exactly right.
Those were really common between 1890
yes.
and 1920. They would build the park right at the end of the trolley line, and electricity was new and exciting and sexy, and so the parks would be all lit up at night. And I know in Tulsa, that's why the fairgrounds is where it is. And in Joplin, there was a park at 17th and Main Street that was at the end of and the same was true, by the way, in Lawrence, Kansas. These are just like kind of random cities where I know this about.
Yeah, there's a lot of them actually. There's some in Ohio, and usually they would call it Electric Park, right? They would actually call the name of the entertainment complex, I guess we call it today, but would be called Electric Park, and they'd build it at the end of the trolley line and get people to ride the trolley out to usually about as far as the trolley went, right? That would be the outskirts of town or something. But in this case, in Oklahoma City, they didn't call it Electric Park. It was called Delmar Gardens, I guess, for some reason. But yeah, it's kind of the same concept, right? They had the racetrack and they built a baseball park out there. And the Oklahoma City minor league team played in that park as the normal tenants. So yeah, good question. So did Oklahoma have any teams in the major Negro Leagues from 1920 through 1948? Well, the answer is no, they didn't. So how do we have major league ballparks in Oklahoma if there was no major league team? Well, the answer is Oklahoma was a convenient stopping point and a profitable place to play for travel Negro League teams going between Kansas City and either Memphis or Birmingham. So the way the Negro Leagues were set up, there was generally two leagues most of the time going on. One was based in the east, kind of around New York, Philadelphia. And then the other one was based in the west, which would be the Chicago, Kansas City, St. Louis, Memphis, Birmingham, and then usually some teams in Ohio, Cleveland, Cincinnati. That was kind of the setup for the Negro Leagues in most years. But when they went on the road, unlike the Eastern teams who could just jump from Philadelphia to New York, a real short trip, play a few games, go back home, or go to Washington, D.C., Baltimore area. In the West, when a team went on the road, like the Chicago American Giants, they had like a 2 or 3 week road trip, right? So they'd go to St. Louis, Kansas City, Memphis, Birmingham, and then come back. You know, it was a long trip. So while they were going, they would try, you know, they wouldn't just go straight from Kansas City to Memphis and play the next game. They would set up some games in Oklahoma to play and make some money on the way, right? So it was a very convenient stopping point and a very profitable place to play.
Do these games have to be between two teams in the Negro Leagues to count as a major league game?
Yeah, Major League Baseball is only going to count games that were between two teams that they're going to recognize as major, right? So, yeah, so sometimes like the Monarchs would come to, let's say, Muskogee and play the Muskogee Reds or whatever. Not not the Muskogee Reds. They usually wouldn't play them. They would play the Muskogee, guess what, Cardinals, I think they were. Yeah, the local black team, right? When they couldn't schedule a team, a major Negro League team to come with them or something to do that. So those games won't count. But they did actually play major Negro League games in Oklahoma, and those are going to be recognized as major league games made by Major League Baseball. So there were actually 120 major Negro League games from 1933 through 1948, meaning between two major Negro League teams. And the Kansas City Monarchs were in 53 of those games. So you can see which team kind of was setting most of those up and was traveling through Oklahoma would be the Kansas City team, right? The closest one here to Oklahoma. And the Memphis Red Sox played in 15 of those games. And then you see the Chicago American Giants, who again would be making their road trip, St. Louis, Kansas City, Memphis. They stopped for 13 games. Cincinnati, Indianapolis, sometimes they were in different cities. The Clowns played in 13 of those games. Cleveland Buckeyes 7. The Atlanta Black Crackers 3, but part of that is that they weren't in the league except for a few years. So, but when they were, they stopped in some Oklahoma for some games. So there's 120 games, and out of those 120, at least 80 of those are going to end up being considered major league games. Now the question is, well, what about the other 40? Why wouldn't they consider those to be major league? Well, that has to do with the fact that, especially like during the Depression, the Negro Leagues folded. Like in 1931, the Negro National League folded after that year. And it was really not until 1937 that another league in the West took its place. And during that time, the Kansas City Monarchs were still a team. They were still a major Negro League team, had Hall of Fame players on it. Even there was a Negro League All-Star game starting in the early 30s, and the Monarch players were elected to that game. So even though the Monarchs were not in a league, they were a major black team. So it's still kind of up in the air about, is Major League Baseball going to recognize those games like the Monarchs played in the early 1930s as major league or not? Simply because the Monarchs were not technically in a league. And so, but we know at least 80 of those games are definitely going to be recognized. And again, the other 40 has to do with either, like I said, either the Monarchs or some team not being in a league officially, or the question about, okay, was this an exhibition game or not? There's a few of those kind of things that sort out, but at least 80 will be. And what cities in Oklahoma hosted major Negro League games? Well, probably not a surprise that Oklahoma City was the leading one. 82 of those games were in Oklahoma City. But what may be a little surprising is that Muskogee was second with 28 games, and Tulsa only hosted 10 games. And if there's no questions now about that, we may address that a little bit later about why Muskogee and not Tulsa. All right, so let's talk about Holland Field. Holland Field, also known as Tribe Park or Texas League Park. You can see pretty clearly from this Sanborn where it was located. You see North Pennsylvania, you can see Virginia, you can see West 4th Street. This is a pretty well-known park. Was the minor league park for a long time for the Oklahoma City team, obviously. Why it was also often called Texas League Baseball Park. So that you can kind of get a feel there of what it looked like. And here is a picture. This came from the oklahoman.com website. So you can see it was, for the time, it was a fairly large park. what you would typically see for an upper minor league team.
Once saw Joe Frazier, go back that picture. Once saw Joe Frazier hit one at the top that scoreboard at the right field. That was a prodigiously high drive to hit a double one.
Which Joe Frazier is that? Is that the one?
Joe
that was
Frazier that managed the Mets. It wasn't the boxer.
Yeah, I knew him. He
This
was.
Joe Frazier was an Indian farm hand in the late 40s. And they played with the Cardinals in the mid 50s.
Mhm.
1 year or 2 years. Had pretty good pinch hitting record. And then later he might manage the Mets.
There's a Cardinal spring training film that he's in. And the reason I know that is my best friend from high school was his father. Joe Frazier is the father of my best friend from high school. And I saw Joe manage the Mets in, I guess, Shea,
Right.
obviously.
He was Cardinals 54, 55.
Yeah.
Very successful in 1954 as a pinch hitter.
Yeah,
And he won a Texas League batting championship while at Oklahoma City.
We used to hunt quail together. So.
Yeah, and he just passed away in the last 2 years, I think.
No, it's longer than that.
Is it longer than that? It's not too long ago, but he's actually buried about 2 miles from where I'm sitting right now. He's buried here near Broken Arrow, Tulsa line here.
Yeah, he had a pecan farm out in outside Broken Arrow, as well as his house in Broken Arrow.
Yeah, so he's actually, I said buried here, and I think it's technically still in Broken Arrow. So anyway, Holland Field hosted a lot of games. Here's just an example of one. This is from 1944, April. The Monarchs and the Clowns played in a wild, it says, 10-9 tilt. It was basically wild because the Clowns were behind going into the ninth inning by 5 runs and almost came back to win. But this is one of the games that will be considered a major league game. So Holland Field is now a major league field. Whoops, go too fast. So it was built in 1924, demolished in 1958. You can see the dimensions originally, 367 down the lines, 410 to center field, 367 to right field. That was in 1940. They were shortened apparently at some point, I guess in the 1950s before it was demolished. They shortened the distances a little bit. But it was for the time, it was a large park, 8,000 to 8,500 people capacity. Today, the site's no longer there. There's a Westco and an A&B Wholesale and some other businesses sitting there. But notable now major league games, April 22nd, 1948. Both Willard Brown of the Monarchs and Neil Robinson of the Memphis Red Sox both went 4 for 5 in a game. It was a 9-8 Memphis win. And just a week later, on April 28th, 1948, there was a game that had 35 assists, which would tie an MLB record. The issue with that game's going to be a little bit doubtful at this point because there's no box score. There's only the game account that mentioned that there were 35 assists, but there's no box score. And without a box score, Major League Baseball is not going to recognize the game. So unfortunately, even though they tied a record, that one's probably not going to be recognized. But the April 22nd game, is a game with a box score and will be an official game. All right, so let's talk about Muskogee. Muskogee had a park called Athletic Park, also known as Owen Field. And this is another Sanborn Fire map where you can see South 5th Street, Boston Avenue, South 4th Street. You can see it was a wooden grandstand. It tells us actually on the map. You can see some bleachers down the first base line and a smaller bleacher area down the third base line. So I don't know if any of you, probably a few of you are familiar with Muskogee. This is what it looks like today. You can see again the exact streets there, South 5th Street, Boston Street. Does anybody know what this is? No takers, huh?
No, Tulsa.
Whoops, I don't want to go forward yet. Sorry. Yeah, this is the Civic Center in the Muskogee now. Right on, you can see it's basically right on the ballpark, the same land. Let me go back here a little bit. You can see the north-south here is a little turned over there. So if we turned the axis a little bit, you could see it would be exactly where this is. One thing you might want to notice, if you look at, you see a bunch of parking lots out what would be left field, but there's a couple buildings just barely in the picture here. And now I'm going to show you a picture from 1949 of Athletic Park. And if you see those two buildings beyond left field there, those are still standing today. Those were the ones you could just barely see in the previous picture. So those are still standing, and you see there's a big tall building out in the distance behind third base there. That building, I believe, is the Manhattan building that is also still standing, about a 9 or 10 story building in Muskogee. And you can see the short bleachers there over by third base next to the grandstand. So Athletic Park, here's our dimensions. We're 300 feet down the left field line, 385 to center, 334 to right. And it held about 2,500 people as of 1934, but at some point it was expanded so that by 1946, it was a 4,000 seat stadium. Interesting note that the Yankees and Dodgers on their way back from spring training played here in April of 1923. And that's the Babe Ruth Yankees. So Ruth was at Muskogee playing in April of 1923. Now what's interesting about this, going to be interesting as Major League Baseball recognizes this park as Major League, is the first Major League game that was played here was on September 1st, 1939, and it was actually a playoff game. So as far as I know, this will be the first Major League stadium whose first game was a playoff game and not a regular season game. The Monarchs couldn't get they shared their stadium with the Memphis Blues, the AAA team. Well, it wasn't AAA back then, but the high minor team. And there was a conflict, so they had to play their first 2 playoff games of 1939 in Oklahoma. They actually played game 1 in Oklahoma City, and then in Holland part, and then they came up to Muskogee for game 2. So that's kind of an interesting fact about the Athletic Park in Muskogee. And notable games, May 13th, 1948, Gene Collins struck out 13 batters pitching for the Monarchs. Gene Collins is kind of an interesting character. I don't know, many of you might know who Steve Dalkowski is. Do you guys know that?
Heard of him.
Heard of him?
Yeah. Don't want to stand on home plate and you're safe.
Yeah. So he was pretty famous as a fireballing left-hander who threw over 100 miles an hour but couldn't throw strikes, right? But he struck out a bunch of guys in the minor leagues, and he would walk guys. So Gene Collins was the Steve Dalkowski of the Negro Leagues. He struck out more than a batter per inning in 1948. And you got to remember, that doesn't sound like much today, but in 1948, Bob Feller led the American League in strikeouts. Bob Feller, I'm sure. And yet his average per 9 innings was 5.3 strikeouts per 9 innings. Feller's was. So Collins was striking out over 9 per 9 innings. The problem with Collins is he also walked 9 per 9 innings. He was a young guy at this time. He actually went into the organized baseball after this. I think it was the White Sox that signed him. He pitched for a year. They ended up making him. He was a pretty good hitter. They ended up making him an outfielder, and he played in the minor leagues for several years as an outfielder, but never made it as a pitcher, even though he threw like 100 miles an hour and could strike out a bunch of guys.
September 1st, 1939 is the day Germany invaded Poland. To start.
Good point. I didn't even think of that. Yeah. Yeah. So that's Muskogee. And then let's talk about Tulsa. Texas League Park, also known as Oilers Park. Here I tried to put them both on the same page so you could kind of see where it is compared to today. So it's on the Tulsa Fairgrounds. You hopefully can kind of see that sort of blank parking lot spot at the bottom. What's neat about this is not, the bottom one is not like a current one either. It's a few years old. So over to the right, you can see the old Driller Stadium, which is now gone, was where it sat at. So Texas League Park was obviously very close to where the replacement park was built over there. And you can see the racetrack just to the south of that. So if you're familiar with Tulsa, you probably know exactly where this is. And come on, slide, go. So this park opened in 1934. It actually collapsed. Part of the grandstand collapsed in April 3rd, 1977 game. There were like 17 people hurt, I believe. That was obviously the end of the park. Once it collapsed, they closed it up. The dimensions were 335, 380, and 350 as of 1940. Held 6,000 people. And so now the first major league game will be recognized as May 7th, 1946. Kansas City defeated the Chicago American Giants 19-6. And notable is that Buck O'Neil, who everybody generally knows, went 3 for 4 in that game with 2 runs scored. And Doug was at the game when it collapsed. We may ask Doug to give us a firsthand account here in a second. Jumping ahead here. So anyway, those are the parks that will be recognized. Now I'm going to talk about one other park before I wrap up here. McNulty Park. McNulty Park was located, as you can see down here, right across from Oak Lawn Cemetery, near 9th Street. Elgin is the street that you can't quite see there. 11th Street is at the very bottom. And if you look on the right, you can see where the park was compared to today. Obviously, Highway 75 was built, now separates Oak Lawn Cemetery from the other side there. There's a Home Depot there. And so McNulty Park is basically, we're in the parking lot of the Home Depot, and where there's a Mazzio's Pizza located on the Elgin there. And this is a picture from 1928 of Tulsa. Pretty nice picture. If you look in the very bottom left-hand corner, you can see McNulty Park. You can see the grandstand there and the field I know it's not great, easily to see, but Elgin runs up, you know, beside of it there all the way through the picture there, and then you can see downtown Tulsa. So why is this one important? Well, this picture is from June 1st, 1921. And if you talk about history, you might know why that date's important. That was the date of the Tulsa race riots massacre. And this is a picture of McNulty Park with the black males who have been rounded up and put into the park as part of protective custody, detainees. So this was in 1921. And what we're going to talk about is the park. First, a little bit about the park. Built in 22 days in 1919. It was raised in 1930. The thing I want to focus on is the NNL Chicago American Giants played the Kansas City Monarchs at a series in 1926. And this was during a, they had a national Negro conference that was hosted in Tulsa. And so these two teams actually were asked to come down and play a series of games as part of this big conference that was going on. What's in one couple of interesting things. One is one of the games was like played at midnight. So they had like floodlights or something. They played the game at midnight after all the activities of the day were finished for this conference. So the dimensions, if you look at the dimensions, 310, 320 to center field, 270 to right field. Very small ballpark. And the right field had a very tall fence that 270 to try to, obviously because of the short distance, to try to cut down on all the balls going over the fence. But it had a large capacity, even though it was a small park. It had a 7,000 capacity, which was fairly large for the 1920s. The University of Tulsa played football here. And it was patterned after Sportsman's Park in St. Louis. And like I said, it had the high wall in right field. And very famously, Lyman Lamb, who was a former major leaguer who had been sent down to Tulsa, had 100 doubles in 1924, most off of the right field wall. That is as far as I know, that's the all-time professional record. Now they did play 168 games, so he had a lot of games to get his 100 doubles, but that's a notable record here. But anyway, let me finish by talking a little bit about the series. So there's a couple of issues here. One is Major League Baseball might have considered it an exhibition because it wasn't part of the regular schedule. These teams came down and played these games kind of outside the schedule. But the bigger problem is there's no box score for this game, even though it was advertised. And after the fact, it was noted that they played these games. There's no box score and there's not even any scores. And that's really a no-go for Major League Baseball. So at this point, unfortunately, although it would make a great story that from the Tulsa riots of 1921, just 5 years later, two Negro League teams played in this park as Major League teams. Doesn't look like it's going to happen. I've searched for the box score or any scores, and I haven't been able to find them. I'm kind of afraid they don't exist. So unfortunately, McNulty Park is not going to be probably recognized as a Major League park. All right, and that's it. Any questions, comments? We end up with 3 Major League parks in 3 different cities for Oklahoma.
I have one comment when you were talking about the ballparks on the trolley lines. League Park in Cleveland was owned by one of the trolley companies. And for the purpose of promoting the trolleys, They own the ballpark and not sure if they were called Indians at that point or they might have still been the Blues at that point.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah, it
but-
seems like
but-
Ohio was a big place for doing that trolley thing. I don't know if trolleys were big in Ohio, but I think Akron and some other cities had the very similar setup where they built a ballpark on the edge of town where the trolley line ended. And there was some kind of an entertainment, Ferris wheels and things, whatever, or a beach. It seems like there was a beach in one place, Euclid maybe. I can't remember. Yeah.
I think that might have even been the same trolley line
Oh,
There
yeah, it might have been. It's
Well,
pretty close to
out
Cleveland.
through Euclid, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they had a big interurban, besides the city trolleys, they had a big interurban trolley system going out to the farmlands to bring the produce back in and stuff.
All right. If there's no questions, I'll turn it back over.
Very good.
What about the firsthand report on the collapse?
Yeah, Doug, are you still on?
Yeah, I'm here.
You have anything you want to say
Oh,
about the
yeah.
collapse?
It was, yeah, I remember that very clearly. It was a Sunday afternoon, and it was like probably the Sunday before the season started, and the Rangers and Astros came to Tulsa for an exhibition game. And I think game started like 1 o'clock. About the time the game started, it started drizzling, little light rain. And if you were ever at Oiler Stadium, Oiler Park, the bleachers are all made of wood. Well, when it started raining, all the fans came up under the grandstand to get out of the rain. And it was an older ballpark, of course, and with the weight of all the people under the grandstands, one section of the grandstand collapsed. I think they said about 20 people fell, maybe 10 or 11 feet. Anyway, I was probably like 15 feet in front of the section that fell. I remember hearing the wood creaking. I didn't know what was going on. All of a sudden, a big boom kind of happened, and this whole section just kind of disappeared out of sight. And of course, the game was held up, and I went down to the lower level to see what happened. Now, I remember Joe Ferguson was a catcher for the Astros at that time. He was pulling lumber, 2x4s and other lumber off some of the fans that had fell. And he'd picked up a small child and carried the child to the ambulance. I do remember that very clearly. It was pretty dramatic situation.
Yeah, and obviously that's a pretty big event in Tulsa baseball history, that collapse.
Yeah, they shortly after that, probably within a week or so, they went ahead and demolished the rest of the stadium, grandstands. And if I remember right, that was probably the first year that the Drillers came to Tulsa. So that first year or two, the Drillers actually played in just pretty much a field that had no bleachers or grandstand. They had folding chairs set up as seats in the stadium for a couple of years until they built Driller Stadium there on the corner that you pointed out. So it was a pretty interesting time for Tulsa baseball.
And I think that was about the time that Roy Clark owned the team, right? Or was one of the owners.
Yeah, I think that's right. And then Sutton was an oil man. I can't think of his first name, William Sutton or Robert Sutton. He bought, I think him and Roy Clark were buddies, and they bought the Drillers. And when they first built the new Driller Stadium, it was actually called Sutton Stadium for a couple seasons. And then apparently Mr. Sutton had got in some kind of legal trouble or financial trouble, and they took his name off the stadium and just renamed it Driller Stadium for a while.
I remember that very distinctly because I was living in Tulsa then, although I was at college when this happened. But Mr. Sutton was an oil and gas investor. At that time, there were federal regulations called new oil and old oil. And to encourage, they had put price restrictions on old oil, but they didn't want, because they put price restrictions on, they knew no one would drill. So they lifted the price restrictions for any new oil. Well, what Mr. Sutton did was take a lot of his old oil and pass it off as new oil so that he could charge higher prices for it.
Mm.
So it was illegal and it was a crime, but it's not like he was, slitting babies' throats on television or something. He was breaking a completely ridiculous regulation, but yes, they did take his name off the stadium, which is why you should never name stadiums after living people.
Hey, sometimes even the dead are dangerous.
Yeah.
Yeah, or even companies, right? Like Enron.
Right.
You know.
I'm trying to remember if that was one of Jimmy Carter's great ideas. It may have been. I don't remember for sure.
It was that time frame, right? So,
Yeah. Along with the low flush toilets and the whole bit. So yeah, I had completely forgotten. I guess in my mind, I've merged the two stadiums. I'd kind of forgotten that there were two stadiums there. But I can definitely remember going to lots of Oilers games. And definitely our favorite player was Walt No Neck Williams, like I said in the chat. He was just because it was what a great nickname. How can you not like a guy with a nickname like that? So.
Yeah, and of course, Warren Spahn managed the Oilers for a period of time, a little bit.
Well, that was great learning about all those games. I wonder that's kind of something that these towns might consider some historical markers on. If those are going to be considered major league games, that would be.
yep, I think that could even be a project for us, right? Or chapter project to try to get some of those done. Because you would think now there'd be more interest in actually doing that, right? They're going to be major league stadiums, not just a minor league one, but there probably should be anyway, right? I mean, they're pretty significant. Most of them are significant minor league stadiums and significant for those cities. So it'd be a good project either way, but maybe this will be an even more incentive to do something like that.
So who regularly played at McNulty Park? Was that a Negro League stadium or?
No, Tulsa had a minor league team that played there.
Okay, I didn't know I didn't know how old the original Oilers stadium was.
Yeah, that was the minor league stadium. Tulsa played there. I don't think they were in the Texas League every year of that stadium. I can't even remember now.
They were
Were they?
yes.
Seems like they were in the Western League one year or something, but
No,
maybe that was
they were in
before
the
that.
Texas League up until the big change where the Pacific Coast League or the American Association became everybody.
Yeah, that was
When
in
Oklahoma-
the 60s.
when
Yeah.
Major League expansion, they became a Cardinals farm. They were a Cincinnati Reds farm back in the Oilers days. Gray Howlett, I think, was the owner.
Yeah, but back in the 20s, they weren't anybody's farm team. It was just a
No,
minor
they
league.
weren't farm teams then.
Right. Well, there started to be, but yeah, there really weren't.
Not formal, except for those at Branch Rickey.
Yeah. Yeah, there were very much informal agreements, but
I'm curious. One of my main memories of that park is they had an announcer who'd say, "Let's go Tulsa," and he would stretch "go" out for about 5 minutes. He was one of those guys who could breathe in through his nose and breathe out through his mouth, like trumpet players and stuff do. And long after he was dead, they were playing him doing that at ball games, and it was kind of weird to hear that "Let's go Tulsa." He did a lot longer than that. I have no idea what his name was, but
Yeah. His name was Andy Andrews,
oh, that's right.
and they still played that recording before the Driller games.
Is that right?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Yep.
That's kind of cold. I don't know.
Well, Kevin, it's obvious you have done a tremendous amount of research. And it's sad that there aren't box scores for some of those games. Is that did they have box score coverage of white minor league games in the papers then? And was it just a dereliction of duty because they were black games, or what do you think the reason is?
Yeah, so that's interesting. The minor leagues were actually very extensively covered, generally by the local papers. So there's a couple issues, right? One is there were also black newspapers, right? Community newspapers, but most of those were weekly papers and not daily. So some of those would cover some of the games, but because they're weekly, some games would get missed because by the time you're publishing a week later, it's old news, right? So they wouldn't even include the box scores. But the interesting thing is the mainstream white papers, like the Oklahoman, totally would ignore Negro Leagues, except for 2 years, 1944 and 45. You go to 1944 and 45, and there's coverage of, every time the Monarchs come to town, and I think I posted it when you saw one of the slides. It had the whole game account, nice box score. All that's like a researcher's dream if you're doing Negro League research. It's all there, right? So they did that for 2 years, 44 and 45, and I was going to go look to see if maybe Oklahoma City's minor league team was suspended those years, because of the war.
Yes.
I
Yes, the
couldn't.
Texas League. Texas
Yeah,
League.
that's what I thought. Right. So they covered the Negro League games because the local Oklahoma City team wasn't playing. Right. So for those 2 years, there's tons of coverage, and the Monarchs were here quite a bit, or in Oklahoma City quite a bit. So, so those 2 years they covered it. All the other years, pretty much ignored it. And I guess I don't know if we ever wrapped up about the whole Muskogee versus Tulsa thing, right? So you notice there's a lot more Muskogee games than there are Tulsa games. And I think a lot of it had to do with the racial tensions in Tulsa, right? Or, the reputation from the Tulsa race massacre and all that, and it also probably had to do with some, relationships. I guess the Monarchs, when they played that first game in Muskogee, that was a playoff game, it was somewhat successful. There were like 2,000 fans, which was it doesn't sound like much today, but we got to remember that, a lot of major league teams that played day games would only draw 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 fans sometimes. So it was a success. And the local Muskogee minor league team, the Muskogee Reds, would basically sponsor those games, right? So they'd sponsor them. They'd come back. The Monarchs would come back and play because they had this relationship with the Muskogee Reds, and they had the ballpark there that was probably the perfect size. It wasn't too big like the Tulsa Park at the time. It would have been more than they needed probably, and more expensive to rent. So the Muskogee Park was perfect, and they just bypassed Tulsa and they'd stop in Muskogee and play games, right? And again, I think it had to do with the whole, the community, the racial climate of Muskogee versus Tulsa maybe was a little better.
Do you have a feel for the racial composition of the crowds for these major league games that occurred in Oklahoma?
So there were white fans, and what's interesting, if you see a lot of other cities, obviously in the South, the advertisements for the game would say seating for white fans. It'd tell you there's going to be separate seating for white fans to give them comfort that they can come to the game and they're not going to have to sit with the black fans, right? There's not any of that for any of the Oklahoma games. There's no, by the way, we're going to have segregated seating. But that might have been another reason why they didn't come to Tulsa till 1946, is that they would have had potentially segregated seating in Tulsa, right? I don't know.
Also, Muskogee is almost entire history has been about almost a third, more than a third African American in population, whereas Tulsa
Right.
is typically 10 to 15% African American. It's higher now, but it was through most of its history, it's been between 10 to 12, 15%. So there probably were, and there were a lot more black owned businesses in Muskogee.
Yeah.
There was more of a black middle class in Muskogee than in Tulsa.
Yeah, and actually, yeah, and that ballpark was actually in a, I believe it was a black community. I mean, where the ballpark sat, the athletic park there, was surrounded by by a black community, right? So, I think all those reasons made Muskogee a lot better for the teams to play there, as opposed to Tulsa. So Tulsa didn't have any, like I said, any games until 1946 between major black teams. And then they had the 10 games in those 3 seasons, 46 through 48.
The city government may have been discouraging it too. Who knows?
Yeah, yeah. And the ballpark, I mean, they may have just said, we're not going to give you the ballpark, right? And Muskogee again was more than happy to welcome the Monarchs, who would draw a big crowd, and they would get a cut, obviously, of the profits, you know. So the Muskogee Reds, the minor league team, was more than happy to host as many games as they could, because they seem to have been fairly successful every time they had one, as far as the turnout in Muskogee.
The names of one of those black teams was the Clowns, but I assume they weren't a clown team in the normal sense of the word. They were a serious baseball team, I guess.
Well,
or were they?
They were and they weren't. They originally weren't in the when they were founded. They were founded as a kind of as a Harlem Globetrotter, is usually the thing you can kind of think of as in the basketball equivalent. But I didn't leave that article up the whole time, that one that talked about the Clowns playing the Monarchs, but it said at the end of the article, oh, by the way, the Clowns did their routine or whatever, right? So they would, but I think it was like either before the game or between innings and that kind of, that when they took infield between innings and stuff, they would do their clowning. The game was a serious game. At that point, the Clowns were they were a Negro American League member, and they were playing to win. They weren't playing just to clown around, but they had the reputation to uphold. So they would do their routine, their shadow ball and all that before the game or between innings and things. But that article did specifically mention that the Clowns did their routine.
That's a fantastic amount of research. I think you should try to publish that somewhere.
That's a good thing, right? Yeah, I'm trying to be the I don't know what the word is. I hate to use the word expert, but between my interest in ballparks and Negro leagues, I'm kind of the Negro League ballpark expert for SABR now. So trying to put together all that kind of information, and there's actually going to be more Negro League ballparks than American and National League ballparks once this recognition goes through, just because the Negro Leagues played everywhere, right? They played a lot of neutral site games. So there's actually going to be more of those ballparks than, the amount of Major League ballparks are going to more than double because of this action by Major League Baseball.
The park where the Monarchs played here in Ottawa County was in Pitcher, which is a defunct mining town now. It doesn't exist anymore. But the park is still there. It hasn't been used for 30 years, but you can still see where it was on maps and things. And that is where there's actually an account by one of the Monarchs describing the game. People sitting on the chat piles and watching the game. And he said they felt a little unsafe. They felt maybe it wasn't safe to win the game, at that point. Because, but Miami, I don't live in Miami, but that's our county seat, was Black people were strongly encouraged to not be here, especially after dark. So it was very rare. After World War II, there were the Tulsi Town Clowns or whatever they were called, played up here several times and so on. So there were African-American exhibition games after World War II. Before World War II, only in Pitcher and some of the mining towns and stuff.
Yeah, the T-Town Clowns were, based in Tulsa in the 40s and 50s, I think. And they played all over, right? They played all over Oklahoma. They were not a national major Negro League team, but they were around for many years there. And I'm sure they played up there in Pitcher, and probably I know they played like Guthrie, and I don't know. I don't know if
They played in Miami.
Yeah, if we had Jake Cornwell on here, he's kind of the expert on the local Oklahoma teams, Negro League teams, and he could tell you exactly. But
those games would have been played at the fairgrounds, which if you guys came up with the Mickey Mantle tour, you may remember I showed you the county fairgrounds, which were built in the 30s. And that was where all the minor league games and exhibition games and stuff were played from 46 to 52. So that's still in existence, but not as a baseball park.
Okay, I think we went over our allotted time, and since I'm using the SABR virtual account, I don't want it to just time us out or anything. I don't know. This is normally when Ken was here, we would just use his account. So I wanted to go ahead and try to tidy things up. There was one thing I did want to bring up to feel out and see who would be interested in this. I was thinking about creating a sort of Facebook group for SABR Oklahoma. I don't know how many people use Facebook. I don't really, but I didn't know if that would be something that people would want, or if it would be even worth my time exploring, or if the emails we send and stuff like that are satisfactory. So I just wanted to bring that up before we adjourn, if anyone thought that would be a good idea, or to just keep doing what we've been doing.
It'd be all right with me. What do you call it? Like or follow? I get all that stuff mixed up, but
yeah, I think you would just follow the page. I think, yeah.
Yeah. I guess I'm on Facebook enough that I'd catch a few things that way probably, but I'm not going to lose any sleep over it if you decide you don't need it.
I think people who were looking for information about baseball in Oklahoma, that's a lot of place they would go. So if it's a lot of work, your salary doesn't really cover that. So
that's a good point, Hank. It could be a way of recruiting, a couple new members along the way that stumble upon us.
Well, yeah, and I know Ken and I, like when the sort of bridging over to my taking over was going on, Ken had suggested that. And initially I was like, maybe, but I started thinking about it more. And I think, newer members, younger members, people looking for information. There are a lot of people where Facebook kind of functions as like a quasi Google. So it might be worth my time. And hey, I got free time. So like I do a lot of stuff for free if I'm interested in it, if I have the hobby, the passion for it. So I may look into that, and if you see any invites or things in the coming weeks, that'll be what it's from. But definitely in the short term, like I said in my last email, I'm always looking for solicitations for meeting ideas, things like that. So if anyone wants to shoot me anything for our next meeting, which like I said, hopefully will be in person, I'm all ears. So there's no dumb questions. There's no bad ideas. So I'll leave you with that. And then once I get some more information, once we get everything situated and a next meeting takes shape, I will give you time and date for that. Hopefully something in Tulsa or in that area. It's been a while since we've been up there. And so I figured it'd be nice for y'all not to have to drive down here. So
Is anybody going to attend the SABR Analytics Conference?
I might. I don't know.
I've registered for it. I went to their inaugural one the very first year, so it's virtual this year. So I'm gonna sign up, or I've signed up for it already. So just interested to see what they have.
And
They've
that's separate from the course, right, Kevin?
Yeah, I was about to say, they've also created a course. So
Mhm.
I may take the course instead of the conference. I don't know. The conference is kind of pricey, I guess I'd say. It's not cheap, but it's very good. I know a lot of the people who are on the
Mhm.
agenda, I guess, are friends of mine. So I might attend, but I was kind of curious about the course and was going to try to take that and see how that went.
I thought about that as well. What was the fee? I didn't see the fee.
I don't actually. The last thing I saw didn't show the fee, so I don't
Oh, okay.
know. I think they've put it out there now, though. I just haven't been back to see.
Have they put out information about when that starts and everything, or
It started now.
it's already started.
The course has started. You can take it now, and there's obviously a SABR discount. If you're a SABR member, it's discounted. But the last time I looked, they didn't have the actual price. So I'm sure it's out there now because people are taking the course. So I don't know.
You haven't looked at it yet, the
Yeah.
actual course material, is that right? Or
Right. I haven't seen the course materials. They announced who the guy was that was doing it, because that was kind of a curiosity to me. Is like they're going to do this thing where you get a certificate and you're supposed to be, that gives you some kind of a expertise, I guess, in the industry or whatever, which I'm not looking for a job in Major League Baseball, so that's not why I'm taking it. But I thought, well, it needs to be, then there better be somebody who would have some real standing, somebody who worked for a major league team or whatever. And the guy, and it's not right. It's the guy that's he works for, gosh, I can't even think. It's either a minor league team or it's a college team. I forgot. So anyway,
I think he works for Penn State University.
That's it. I knew, and I'm like, okay, so this is the guy. I know a lot of these analytic guys. This is a guy I've never heard of, and but that doesn't mean he's not good. I just don't see that as something that's going to be. If I were a young guy in my 20s wanting to get into Major League Baseball, would this get me anywhere? I'm thinking probably not, right? I mean, this guy from Penn State, yeah.
Of course, sometimes the true practitioners don't line up real well with the greatest instructors. Sometimes you can learn a lot from somebody that isn't the big name, and vice versa. The very top people in the profession may not be that good at getting it across in a virtual course. You just, I don't know.
The other issue might be proprietary information, because that's what I encountered every time I tried to present something, is like, oh no, you can't talk about that. You can't talk about this. So maybe they can't.
Yeah, it could be. And again, the guy may be fantastic. He might be a fantastic teacher. I was just saying it, and for what I want to do, it's probably great. But if I were a young guy trying to get into Major League Baseball, I might be a little disappointed that, is this going to impress some general manager of the Cardinals that I went and took this course from Penn State baseball analytics guy. I don't know. That's just my opinion, but
I think the other criteria was willing to work 80 hours a week for low pay.
Yeah, probably.
That would impress them more, I think.
That's very true. They don't pay very much because there's such a demand. Everybody wants to work for a major league team. So if you're a data guy, data science guy, you could probably get $200,000 a year job in the private industry. You're not going to get that from a major league baseball team. But some people, that's their dream, and they're willing to work for the low pay and a lot of hours, right?
To be young again.
Yeah, yeah. And I was going to say on the Facebook thing, Jesse, it's really easy to set up a Facebook page for a organization. I set one up for the SABR Ballparks Committee. It's like a 5-minute process. You know, you set it up, pick out some kind of picture for your banner. It's Oklahoma related in your business. The harder part is you kind of have content hitting it every day or every few days. That's the hard part. If nothing happens on the page for a week or two, then people kind of lose interest and it kind of dies, just like a website, right? You know, we tried the website before, right? Howard sent one up, which was nice, but we didn't really do much with it, so it kind of withers.
Because nobody looked at it.
Yeah. So,
I just gave up.
Yeah. So but the Facebook page is
But-
going to be the same
But
thing.
we still have it. I'm
Well, the
still
thing-
paying the bill on it.
If you
so.
put content out there every few days, it'll work.
I was going to say the Facebook is different. To me, it's a push-pull thing. If I have to remember to go to a website to pull information, I get busy and I'm going to forget all about it. The thing Facebook would have going for it is pushing to you,
Mhm.
and you may not. It may flash across the screen really quickly, but it was there. And so I think there's a big difference in the way I operate, at least, between pushing and pulling information.
Yeah, I hadn't even considered that. But you know, I'll think about it. It seems like people would be at the very least moderately interested in it. And then, I mean, if I'm running it, it's up to me to come up with content every couple of days, no matter how, you know, inane it might be, just something to, you know, hey, opening day's coming up or what have you. So,
Well, I think
Yeah.
even a new post every week or two based on other groups I'm in is enough to keep it viable. I don't think it has to be, you know, that frequent, really.
Well,
I could absolutely do
if the
once a
group
week. Yeah.
members get notification when something's posted and you leave it so that any member of the group can post. I'm in 2 of them that are that way. And there's really no maintenance involved. Not that I'm in charge of either one of them, but one is just a family group, and the other one's history of town.
Yeah, we would all be able to post, right? So it wouldn't just have to be
Yeah, so
Jesse.
if somebody's doing something, say, hey, neat, like you guys ought to know that Wainwright and Molina are now 10th on my list of all-time pitcher catcher innings.
Yeah,
Uh,
or like this obituary for Peterson, right? Who was the captain.
Yeah,
I could post that out there,
Well,
and then you.
No,
You-
I'd
you
seen
know,
Peterson on the web because the Oklahoma State posted.
Oh, okay. Well,
Uh,
I got it
I'm
because
in a
I'm on
group-
the
I'm in
other
a group for my old high school, and shoot, they may post something 4 or 5 times a year when somebody dies, but I still see it, and I notice it, and it's
Yeah.
still viable.
Up on the upper banner on your Facebook is notifications,
Yeah.
groups that you belong to that have something new. But yeah, it's not a big deal. But it's nice to have a communication where you're not having to, you get the people who are interested. If you go the email route, well, what do? You do everybody, or like Ken did with everybody he had ever encountered and talked about the SABR chapter with was on his mailing list, and becomes impossible to keep up with. And if you're restricted just to members, well, are they serious members, or are they people who paid their dues and now they're waiting for it to run out? We have both of those kind of people around. So I think it's a good idea, and I don't think it requires really that much input from one person. I mean, there are several of us who are working on stuff hey, that's as far as it goes. And I've done lots of research. It's all sitting here on my computer. When I die, it'll go with me. Or when the computer dies, probably more.
No, but yeah, you make a good,
I
you
hope
make a
it's
good
sooner.
point. Because there's been all sorts of random stuff that I've been working on and just kind of tabled it, but it might be cool to,
Well,
yeah.
that should put that on there and you find out if anybody else is interested.
Yeah,
Yeah.
put a teaser out there and say, what do you
Yeah.
think about this? Or what have
Yeah.
I forgotten or whatever? And
Or, I found this result. Do you want more details on it? And if you do, I'd put it, present it to next meeting, or heaven forbid, submit it to a publication. I really don't believe in doing that, but my history of the scientist proves it too.
you don't believe in publish or perish, huh?
I perished. That's how you get locked in low-level positions that may have a title, but they're still pretty low level. But you know that better than I do.
Yeah, I know low level for sure.
But anyway, I think it's a good idea. And it certainly beats trying to maintain a website where you do have to have content. Not only that, working with WordPress just drove me bananas. And HTML, I'm old. I mean, I program in Fortran. For those who know programming, you know how old that makes me. And some of the stuff I don't understand. Well, being 80 years old doesn't help. But Facebook does it for you. There are a lot I don't like about Facebook, but I also don't use things that they make available that I don't want. I mean, last thing I would do is use Facebook for a news source, for instance.
Jesse, I think you need to design a baseball Wordle.
Yeah, I always joke that I'm the world's oldest millennial. I still haven't gotten into that, so that's all new to me. So I don't. But I have a feeling that it's going to be like everything else in the last 20 years. I'm going to get into it, and then it'll be dead in 2 weeks. So I'm just going to wait for it to run its course.
Well, Wordle's going to fade because the New York Times bought the rights to it, and it's going to be behind a paywall one of these days. So
Yeah. But Jesse, you could post trivia questions, Oklahoma related trivia questions every week or something, because you're the trivia expert.
I hadn't even thought of that. That's a good idea too.
Yeah.
So yeah, it seems like we've got enough ammo here to do something with it. So I mean, I've got some free time in the next coming weeks. I'll probably get something hammered out and try to send out invites to people, and then from there it can kind of spider web and go where it needs to go. But yeah, it seems the consensus is that at the very least it's a decent idea, and then we'll see if it gets any traction. Either way, like, it doesn't sound like it's going to take too much time, so it's no skin off my nose. I can whip something up and in the coming weeks, and hopefully have that out to y'all, and see if I can get any other people from outside interested. But that was really, like, in terms of business, that was really all I had, just to gauge the interest on that. But that'll give me something to do, so I can get situated with that. And then, yeah, once you start getting invites, then you'll know that I've done it. So, but I believe that's everything I had. Unless anyone's got anything else, I'll go ahead and shut it down before they decide to shut it down for me. I don't know what the protocol is.
I'll just say thanks, Kevin, and thanks,
Jesse,
we just
both of you.
appreciate your meeting.
Yes, absolutely. That was informative. And despite the fact that I looked at it yesterday, it was still informative today. It was a good presentation.
Good. I'm
Thank you.
glad you liked it.
Thanks,
All right.
everyone.
All right.
Yep. Thank you.
Bye.